أول جامعة أهلية مصرية بحثية في القرن ال21. يمكن احنا النهارده بنحتفل مع بعض بأول حدث من نوعه يحصل في الجامعات المصرية، إن الجامعات المصرية تستقبل رائدة فضاء أمريكية. وطبعا احنا عارفين برنامج الفضاء الأمريكي من البرامج التكنولوجية المتطورة، وده بيخدم كتير جدا في أهداف جامعة النيل، الجامعة التكنولوجية بحثية في المقام الأول. أنا هتكلم بالعربي في الأول وبعد كده هسويتش للإنجليش. الدكتور طارق خليل هيقدم كلمة الجامعة، وبعدين دكتورة ماري ألان ويبر هتقول الكلمة بتاعتها. هيبقى فيه في الآخر أسئلة وأجوبة Q&A سيشن. هيبقى فيه فولنتيرز، ممكن الفولنتير يقفوا، مجموعة الفولنتيرز اللي هيوزعوا علينا كروت. الكروت موجودين في الآخر، ممكن تشوفوهم كلكم حضراتكم. هيوزعوا علينا كروت نكتب الأسئلة، هنلمها من حضراتكم وإن شاء الله نجاوب عليها. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and we are here pleased to have you with us at Nile University, the first research entrepreneurial university non-for-profit in Egypt. And we have the honor to have Dr. Mary Ellen Weber, the American astronaut with us today, to share with us the experience and exploring the space. And we are really very pleased to have you with us today. We'd like to send our special recognition and thanks to the American Embassy in Cairo and all the team working to have this event live to our stage. And we'd like to thank Mr. Mark Wenning for all the support, the culture attaché for the American Embassy, with all the support. Please give him a hand to Mr. Mark. Thank you very much. Also, we'd like to thank Dr. Mary Ellen Weber to have the chance to stay for a couple of hours to share with us the experience. Dr. Mary Ellen, thank you. At the end of the session, there will be a Q&A session. So the teams of volunteers from Nile University IEEE student activity, please raise your hands. And the gentlemen will distribute like an index card with you, so please write down your questions and they will collect it back in order to answer the questions at the end of the session. I'd like to have your attention that please make sure that your mobile phone is switched off or silent, okay? And there is a special request again for the photos and the selfies and all these things. So we'd like to make it like in a maybe no photos, I'd like to say that. Okay? Please, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tariq Khalil, President of Nile University, to address the keynote speech for today. Dr. Tariq Khalil, please.
Thank you, Nizar. Good afternoon. It's indeed my privilege and pleasure to welcome you all here to Nile University campus. As you well know, Nile University is the first national
as you can imagine, astronauts testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. As you can imagine, astronauts get to do some very great things, some incredibly fun things. We fly jets, we train in simulators, we train underwater, and certainly the best thing that astronauts get to do is that we get to fly in space every once in a while. And, but for me, one of the best parts about being an astronaut was having the chance to share the experience of space with my friends, my family, and with people all over the world. And I remember very clearly on both of my space flights, when our space shuttle had landed on the runway and rolled out, and there I was sitting. And I remember very clearly thinking, I cannot wait to get home and tell my husband and my family and my friends and everybody all about it. happy to be here today to have the opportunity to share it with you. I believe that space exploration is extremely important. I believe it is our destiny. I believe it is the future of all humankind. I do believe that one day we will have many space stations. We will have colonies. We will be going to asteroids and to moons and to planets. That's my vision. And think about it. For thousands and thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and they tried to imagine what was out there. What were those points of light? And they had no idea. None. And in this tiny blink of time in the history of human beings, we happen to be born. We happen to be here at the very dawn, at the beginning of it all, when we're taking our very first footsteps off this planet. And so today I'm going to share with you my experience of flying in space. But I do want to share with you, and as I look out, I see, certainly younger folks than I am. And I look at you, I'm envious, I'm jealous. Because my days of flying in space are over. And even though I got to orbit the Earth and go to a space station and really have incredible experiences, my days are over. But we are going to be going to other places, to asteroids, maybe back to the moon, and certainly one day, I believe, onto Mars. And so it's the next generation. It's you young folks, young people that are here in the audience. You're going to have opportunities that I never will have. And so I'm jealous. So before I tell you about my experiences, I want to first explain a little bit about how we go into space. This is important to understand because most people think that we go into space by going up very high. Well, I have a big rocket engine right now, and I went straight up in the air, 600 kilometers. I would be in space, but only very briefly. I would come right back down to the ground. Gravity would pull me down. So how do we go into space? It's not about going up high. It's with speed. You have to go fast. So think about it. If you throw a ball in a straight line, gravity pulls that ball to the Earth in a curve. You've seen it. Well, it turns out that the size of that curve depends on how fast you've thrown that ball. The faster you throw it, that curve gets larger and larger. So imagine if you could throw that baseball or throw an astronaut or throw a spaceship so fast that the size of that curve as it was falling towards Earth was actually larger than the Earth. It would continue to fall towards the Earth, but it would miss. It would go around and around. That's how we go into space. So how fast do you have to throw this ball or this astronaut or this spaceship? You have to throw it 25 times the speed of sound. 30,000 kilometers an hour. Think about that. Think about that. This is so fast that when we're in space, we go around the world 16 times every single day. 16 sunrises every single day is what we see from space. Just 1.5 hours. So think about if you're sitting in Cairo traffic, how far you can go in 1.5 hours. Well, while you're doing that, the people in the space station are going all the way around the entire world. Now, I say it's important to understand how we go into space because speed is what makes spaceflight so risky. It is a very dangerous and risky thing that we do whenever we send anything into space. And it is because of that need for speed. We need to have powerful engines. We need to have essentially a bomb. We need an explosion to get anything going that fast. So when the crew walks out to the launch pad, they're going and they're sitting on top of a bomb. In fact, even the people that want to rescue us, they're too scared to be close. In fact, they're over 6 miles away. The rescue people are over 6 miles away. And if we have a problem on launch, say one of our engines doesn't work, we still have to take all of this fuel, everything with us, and go into space and get rid of it. Because otherwise, that explosion would be here on the ground, and it would be dangerous for everybody, not just the crew. And so it's very dangerous because of that, the explosives that we need, but it's also dangerous when we want to come home. So imagine, everybody rub your hands together for me. Now rub them faster. Faster. Okay, now rub them together 30,000 kilometers an hour. Okay, you can't quite do that, but feel how warm your hands are. Feel how warm your hands are from just that little bit of friction. Well, if you are going 25 times the speed of sound where there's no air up in space, and then you hit this air that we breathe, the atmosphere, it's incredible heat that's generated. It's so hot that electrons are stripped from the atoms. We're coming back in a plasma. A plasma is like a neon light bulb where energy takes the electrons away and generates all this light. Well, that's what we come in when we come home. And, I told you we need the speed. It's important to understand that we need every last bit of it. When we want to come home, think about this for a minute. I want to land on a little tiny runway in Florida. I slow down on the other side of the world. I only slow down 1%. So how many here have had a professor or a teacher tell them, well, you have to give 100% effort? Well, I'll tell you, if you're trying to go into space, you really do have to give 100%. So I told you about the need for speed and that it makes it dangerous. Well, just how dangerous is it to go into space? On my first mission, they calculated the chances that all the pieces of equipment that are on the space shuttle, the chances, the odds that they would fail. And they came up with a number. They said you have 1 in 100 chance of not coming home. Well, in fact, we had about 100 missions, and we lost 2 space shuttles. So really, it was about 1 in 50. So those numbers may not mean very much to you, but think about this. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I did the calculation. At my home airport, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, if flying airplanes were as risky as flying into space, there would be 10 crashes every single day at only one airport in the world. So even if we make space travel 10 times safer, 100 times safer, 1,000 times safer, it's still very risky. If you were going to the airport and you were thinking that 1 or 2 airplanes were going to crash there every day, you might not be willing to get on that airplane to go to that business trip or take that vacation. So it's still a very risky thing, and even with the new spacecraft that are being designed, it's still very risky. And so it's important. I was telling you why I thought it was important, that I believe it's the future of human beings to be in space. Well, you have to have really important reasons to take those risks. And that's what I really hope for all of the young people that are in the audience today. As you look to your future, as you think about the things that you want to do, the things you want to be, the career you want to have, I hope that you find something that is so meaningful to you. It's not about making money. Money isn't what gets you happiness. It is believing what you do. So I hope you find something that you believe so much that you will devote your life to it, and maybe even believe in it so much that in fact you're willing to risk your life for it. Now, I want to take a minute before I show my film, and I want to talk about what it's like to be in space. So certainly the thing you think about most is the fact that you're floating around. I told you we still have gravity. Gravity is still pulling us towards the Earth, so gravity doesn't go away, but that gravity is just keeping us going around and around the world. Inside your spaceship, there's no gravity pulling you to the floor or to the ceiling. In fact, there is no floor or ceiling once you're in space. That's all just part of your mind. In fact, when you're floating around, I can look at that and I can decide that, hey, that's the floor. And I'm floating upside down above the floor. You decided. It's mental. There's nothing physical about a floor or a ceiling. The other thing people don't think about is just how annoying it is to not have gravity pulling you to the Earth. So think about something very simple, like, say, if you brushed your teeth this morning. Think about how simple that was. Turned on the water, you got your toothbrush, you got your toothpaste, you took off the cap. Probably took you a minute, maybe two if you're a really good toothbrusher. But think about it in space. Well, you have to float over to the locker, and you've got your crewmate, they're exercising on the bike right in front of your locker, and you float over them, and you get out these things. Everything comes floating out, not just your toothbrush and toothpaste, but also your notebook and your, whatever. And you're trying to get it all back in there. And now you have the things you need, and so you put your feet in these little foot loops, these little straps on the floor so that you're not floating around anymore. And now the toothpaste is trying to float away, and you grab it, you take the cap off, and then it starts to float away. And then you have a little water fountain right here, and you have a rag, and everything is floating away. And in fact, if you turn your back on anything for even a second, you'll find that it's floated away. And in fact, on both of my flights, pieces of equipment were lost for days, and we were looking for them, hoping that we would not have to confess to the ground that we lost critical pieces of equipment. And in both cases, we were able to find them, and we didn't have to tell the ground. But now you all know about it, so we'll see how that goes. And interestingly, so we're looking, and you know where on my second flight, you know where it was? It was actually floating above the toilet, of all places. Turns out all the air inside the shuttle actually ended up going across the toilet. There it was. Who knew? And in fact, astronauts spend hours each day just looking for things that floated away. So when I tell you that floating around without gravity is annoying, maybe you have an idea of that now. And then I talked about brushing teeth. Imagine if you're trying to replace a piece of equipment with 20 bolts and washers and tools and checklists. Everything can become a great mess. Now the other really cool thing about being in space is, of course, looking at the Earth. And that is one of the best parts about being in space. There's a couple of things, and you'll see it from the video, but there's a few things I would like to share with you. First of all, when you look at a globe or you look at a map, your eye immediately goes to borders. You look at countries, you want to look at your city, your country, we look at borders when we think of the world. When you see the Earth from space, you cannot see any borders. There are no countries. It's a planet. I mean, we don't think of our Earth as a planet, but it is a planet. And there's this sun, this star just shining on this planet. And you really feel like an earthling. You don't feel like you're part of any country. You're part of this planet Earth. Now the other thing that you notice when you look at the Earth is that you cannot see evidence of human beings. When the sun is shining on the Earth, it's very difficult. Everybody says, well, you may have heard, well, you can see the Great Wall of China from space. No, you can't. No, you can't. On my second flight there, we were going over it. We were all crammed around the windows. We were all looking for it. And after we had passed, we said, well, did you see it? No. Well, we'll just tell everybody we saw it. You cannot see the Great Wall from space. But at night, that's when the cities really light up the Earth like jewelry. It's breathtaking. It's beautiful. And that's where you see human beings. That's when you can begin. That's when you realize it's home. And the other thing that's really cool, the Earth at night, I didn't expect this, but the edge of the atmosphere is very thin. This air that we breathe is a very thin layer. And the very edge of it glows just a little bit. The sunlight coming in ionizes those atoms, takes the electrons away, and like that neon light bulb, makes it glow. And you can actually see meteorites going into the atmosphere below you. How many have seen a shooting star before? How many have seen one? Oh, excellent. It's incredible, isn't it? Well, think about this. When you see that, that may be 100 kilometers above you when you see that. Well, when you see them from space, they're actually 600 kilometers below you. They're going into this planet that you are no longer a part of. It's incredible. I remember on my first flight, there were two of us. It was our first flight. And when we were all looking at the Earth, we were all floating around the back windows, and somebody said, "Hey, look, a meteorite." And Kevin, the other new guy, and I both said, "Where?" I'm glad you got that joke. We think of it as up when in fact it's below. Now the other thing I have to share with you, and you will see it in the video, but one of my very favorite, most fond memories of looking at the Earth from space is actually of Egypt. And it's one of the first scenes you'll see. And the reason why I remember this so clearly, I had a sleeping bag, and we just hook our sleeping bags anywhere inside the spaceship. And I had mine right underneath an overhead window. So there's a window at the top of it. Now I had a cover on the window because remember, you're going around the world 16 times a day. And how annoying would that be to try to sleep if it was 45 minutes of light, 45 minutes of dark, 45 minutes of light. So you have a cover so you can sleep. And I woke up, alarms went off, the music started playing, and I took down this cover. And the view I saw was of Egypt. It was of the Nile and the Nile Delta, and it was breathtaking. I grabbed a video camera right away and I started filming it. It was before I'd ever come to Egypt. It was before I ever even dreamed of coming here. But it was what made it so beautiful was the dark green against the golden sand, and then you have the beautiful blue water. It just took my breath away. Now I had talked about cities. And I told you they pop out like jewelry. It turns out there is one city in the whole world, on the whole planet Earth, that looks different from every other city. Can anybody guess what city that is? I think I heard it here, Las Vegas. Isn't that funny? I guess all of those lights make it actually be a different color. And I thought of this the other day. I toured the Great Pyramids over in Giza, and I was thinking about seeing this from space, and now here I was on the ground. And then I thought of something funny. I remember flying over Las Vegas. You know, they have one of the casinos there. It's called Luxor, and it's a pyramid, the shape of a pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid is a big spotlight, and you can actually see that spotlight from space. So somebody didn't like that, apparently. So even though you can't see the Great Pyramid from space, you can see this other Luxor pyramid from space over in Las Vegas. With that, I could continue to tell you about what it's like to be in space, but I think I'll let the video help me out a little bit.
And maybe, oh, there we go.
Now, the space shuttle, when you think about it, the space shuttle is the white thing, and that's what actually goes around and around the world. But when we launch, we have a few more pieces to it. This big orange thing is actually a fuel tank. It's a little bit like the fuel tank in your car, except it doesn't carry gasoline. It carries liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And normally oxygen is something we breathe. It's a gas, it's air. Well, in order for us to use it as a fuel, we have to cool it down so much that it's actually a liquid. Now that fuel gets burned in 3 engines that are at the bottom of the space shuttle back here. So when you turn on those engines, that provides a lot of the power. But the real launch happens when these other 2 things are started. And that's these, we have 2 solid rockets that are strapped to our big fuel tank. They're called solid rockets because the fuel inside is solid. Once you light it, once you turn that on, there's no going back. You cannot shut off a solid rocket. You just have to wait for all the fuel to be used up. And that, again, getting back to what I said earlier, we're on this, essentially this bomb. If there's any problem, we've got to go get rid of the solid rockets and that liquid hydrogen and oxygen. Now, when we get ready to go out to our spaceship, we get in these survival suits. They have helmets and gloves that will make seals. There's no air in space. If we got a hole in our spaceship and lost our air, we could hopefully inflate these suits and keep us alive long enough to get back to where there is air. Now, the 3 engines I told you about, you see them turning on there. They light 6 seconds before the actual launch, but the real launch happens when those solid rockets go off. You know you're going someplace and you're going there very, very quickly. In fact, by the time we clear the launch tower, we're already going 200 kilometers an hour. Think about that. Now, we have seats, but we're actually on our backs. We're lying on the back of our seats. We've got a parachute there. We've got oxygen bottles. We've got a life raft, survival gear. And so it's pretty uncomfortable. There's a lot of shaking and rocking. And the entire time, what we're focused on is doing our job. So I told you that you have to be prepared to not come home. There's this very good chance you might not come home. But that is not your biggest fear. Your biggest fear is that you might not come home because of something you did or you didn't do. So you're thinking about all the things, you're thinking about your job, you're focused on your job, you're looking at your computer screens, you are doing everything you can, because if something goes wrong, you have only 5 seconds to figure it out and do the right thing. Now, so you're in your helmet, all the shaking, all the shuddering, and you have to be laser focused on what's happening. Now, after 2 minutes, those solid rockets, the fuel is all used up, and that's when we get rid of them. And this is where the news stations would often say, well, that was a successful launch. You'll see that those 3 engines were still running, and they had to keep running for another 6.5 minutes. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to space. We might just cross the ocean and land over in Morocco or Spain, or we might just go once around and come home. Now, on my flight, all of our engines, both of my flights, they worked great. And one of the first things you do is get rid of that big orange tank, which is what you're looking at there. It's only 99% fast enough. That's not good enough. It burns up, and it's never seen again. Now, what you're looking at here, this is from the back of the space shuttle. So there's a camera back here by the tail of the shuttle, and it's looking forward. These 2 rectangles that you see here, those are windows. The entire area for the crew to live in is about the size of a large closet. There's an upper deck and a lower deck. And on the upper deck, we have these 2 back windows, and then there's 2 windows on the top of it. But it's very small, very, very small, because we're trying, we want to be able to carry up more important things than just room for astronauts to live in. Now, what you're looking at here, this is a robotic arm. I'm maneuvering it around. That was one of my jobs on my 2nd flight. We were constructing the International Space Station. It was very early in the program. It was only the 3rd flight. Nobody had been there in over a year. So we were in an orbit going 25 times the speed of sound.
And one of the first things we did is match our orbit to that space station so that we could connect to it and help build it. So I'm checking out the arm before we do that. Now, as cool as it is to go 25 times the speed of sound, imagine how cool it is to connect with this little tiny dot, which is a space station going 25 times the speed of sound. This is what we call the docking mechanism. That's what I was controlling during this time. You're looking through a camera that's looking up through it, and those wires there help us align our spacecraft with the other spacecraft we're docking to. You see, everybody is on that upper floor of the crew compartment during this. This is a target on the space station as we're coming together ever so gently. Keep in mind, we're both rocketing around the world at 25 times the speed of sound. Now, this next view is from the same camera you saw earlier, but you'll see that you can't even see the crew compartment. It's all blocked by the space station. Now, I told you not having gravity can be annoying. It's also annoying because you have very bad hair days in space. Now, I have my feet in those straps on the floor, and I'm back looking out those windows, and I'm moving that big robotic arm around our space station. I have a crew member attached to the end of that arm, and that's how he's able to get to the top of the space station in order to attach some of the equipment that we brought up there with them. Now, I didn't do a spacewalk on my second flight, but I was trained as the primary spacewalker for my first flight. If something had broken, then I would have gone outside the space shuttle to go fix it. This is a view from a camera that's on the elbow of the robotic arm, and I'm using it to make sure I don't bang either the arm or my fellow crew member into any of the equipment. Now, you'll see this is a big, heavy piece of equipment that Jeff is moving around there. There's no gravity in space, so you can move big, heavy things. You can actually get them moving very easily. The problem is not getting things to move, it's actually getting them to stop moving. So think about it. If I'm in space and I'm floating around and I want to go over there, all I have to do is just push off and I'll go there. But I've got no friction, I've got nothing to stop me when I reach that other wall. So you can always tell the first time flyers, because they're banging into walls and such, and it takes them a while before they figure out how to move very gently across their spaceship. Now what you see here, this is at the end of the spacewalk, and Scott is letting our two spacewalkers in through this hatch. That hatch actually led to a few places. If you closed off two other hatches, you would have an airlock that you could do a spacewalk from. Or you could keep going through what was a big long tunnel, and you would get to another room that we had in the back of our space shuttle. This is where we carried up about 3,000 pounds of equipment that we were transferring over to the space station. Now, if you go through that tunnel, you could actually go through that docking thing, that docking mechanism, and go into the space station itself. And that's what you're looking at here. This is Jeff and Jim were working on some electrical lines right there. Now, there were only two modules, or two rooms there at a time. The first, on all sides, had hatches. And the idea was that in the future, we would bring up more rooms, more modules, and that's how we would grow the space station. And in fact, we have many modules up there from many countries. The space station is the size of a soccer field. Back then, there was only two of these compartments, two of these rooms. There were some failing batteries that Susan and Yuri are working on to repair. Jeff there is actually controlling the space station. It's controlled through laptops. Now I want to take you on going back to the space shuttle to give you a little bit of a tour of what it's like to live on the space shuttle this is on that upper floor I was telling you about. Again, the whole thing is, you know, just the size of a closet. You get to the lower floor by going through an opening, a hole in the floor. And you'll see that there's a ladder there, which doesn't do you a whole lot of good in space, but on the ground it's useful to go from one to the other while you're preparing the space shuttle. When you go through that hole, on the left what you'll see is the door to the bathroom. It's very close, it's right here. And right in front of it is our kitchen, what we call the galley. And the galley was a place, it had an oven and it also would dispense water. Now that water that we ate and drank, we ate it because the food that we bring up doesn't have water. That water that we ate and drank actually came from fuel cells. We combined hydrogen and oxygen to make electricity, and it also made the water that we ate and drank. Now, here's a great example. No ceiling, no floor, it's all the same, whatever you can hook yourself to. I'll point out that bike doesn't have a seat. Think about it. It only has a belt to keep you from floating away. That's a drop of water, believe it or not. Gravity is what limits the size of raindrops. In space, a drop of water can be as big as you make it. There's one of the sleeping bags I was telling you about. You strap yourself in at night. And now these are some views of the Earth from space. And as I told you, one of my very favorite and very first views is of the Nile. Isn't it breathtaking? And the video it's even far more beautiful from space. Now, one of the cool things about looking at the Earth from space is that you can see the power in the continental plates as they crash into each other. This is actually the Himalaya mountains, and where India is actually crashing into China to build those mountains. Sometimes you not only get, and here's another view, you not only get mountains forming, but you also get great tragedies, as we know what happened in Nepal and Kathmandu very recently. Now this is two planets rising before the sun, and we wanted to capture this sunrise on film. And it was difficult to do because the light levels changed so quickly, but since we had 16 tries every single day, we eventually got it right. Here is the Earth at night. And you'll see some of the cities that I told you about, how they pop out like jewelry. That flashing that you see, that's lightning. Those are storms. And here is this little faint line. That's the edge of the atmosphere glowing, just ever so slightly, like a blanket covering the Earth. Now here, this is a picture of the aurora. We live on a big magnet, that is the Earth. And that magnetic field keeps out some of the solar radiation, the radiation from the sun that would kill us otherwise. Only at the two poles of the magnet can that radiation sneak in, and when it does, it ionizes the gas and makes it light up, and that's when we get the light, the aurora lights. Now here it's time to come home. We set up seats again, and I'm sitting right behind the pilot taking this film. And it's time to slow down just 1%. But we're still going very, very fast. As we enter the atmosphere, you see all that flashing? That's from the energy as we hit the Earth's atmosphere going that fast. Now the shuttle took off like a rocket ship, but it landed like an airplane. It's important to realize it was an airplane without any engines. The crew had one and only one chance to make a successful landing. So think about it, we weren't even slowed down enough to be able to lower our landing gear till just seconds before landing. So that's one of the things, just one example of the things you worry about. If I press that button for the landing gear, will it come down? Will it work? If it didn't, it would not be survivable, and you could not live through that. So after we land, we're getting used to a great many things. Obviously, we're getting used to having gravity again. Everything that was floating around is no longer floating around. So we won't have to look for things, but gravity does make some things heavy and not so good.
We're also getting used to being back home. And I remember I started out telling you how my very distinct memories from the end of my 2 missions. What I remember when I see this view is sitting there thinking, I cannot wait to share it with people. Now, before I take questions, there is something I do want to share with you because I'm often asked 2 questions. First, did you always want to be an astronaut? That's probably the number 1 question. And the second one is, is there any way I can ever be an astronaut? 2 questions. And I want to tell you about that because when I was young, when I was the age of many of the young people that I see out in the audience tonight, you have to understand, I had 0 chance of becoming an astronaut. None. No chance. And that was for 2 reasons. I did not come from a powerful family. I did not come from a wealthy family. I was just a regular little girl in a little town in the middle of our country, in the middle of the United States. And in fact, my father died when I was only 1 year old. And my mom had no career. You see, her 2 brothers went to university, but at the time, they didn't see any reason why a woman would need to go to university. So there she was. She had virtually no money. She had no career, no way of supporting her 3 young kids. I was 1 year old, my brother was 2 years old, my other brother was 3 years old. The second reason why I had 0 chance of becoming an astronaut is that there were no women astronauts. It was not allowed for women to be astronauts. So if you ask me, did I always want to be an astronaut? I never even considered it. And this is my message to you. Things change. Doors open up. Doors that you don't even know exist will open. For my mother, a door opened up. There was a chance for her to get funding to go to a university. And she was able to, after 7 years, get a teaching certificate. And she was born to be a teacher. She was a wonderful teacher. And she was able to support her 3 kids. But even more importantly, she was absolutely convinced that education was the future. We still didn't have very much money, but she knew that education was the key to our having a successful and happy life. We were all going to go to university. She didn't know how, but we absolutely were going to. So that's one door that opened. And then also, later when I was going to college, another door opened up. Suddenly, NASA was allowing women to be astronauts. It wasn't until I was in college. And so suddenly there was a door open. But had I not been prepared, had I not focused on education, had I not focused on studying, had I not picked the hardest subjects there were to study, had I not studied math, science, and engineering, when that door opened up, I would not have been able to walk through it. So no matter what doors you see that might be closed to you right now, things do change, they will change, doors will open. Your job right now is to be prepared, to make sure that you are prepared to walk through them when they do. Because how tragic would it be if I were in college and I hadn't been studying the right courses and I hadn't worked very hard, and then suddenly I wanted to become an astronaut, and because I hadn't prepared, I wouldn't have been able to. So it is possible. It is possible. How can you become an astronaut? Start now. Start now and prepare. And with that, I think we do have time for some questions. And I think the plan is for somebody to hand me questions that you all have been writing down, if I understand that correctly.
I can read them out, or if you'd like to pose yourself.
If there are.